public class coordinator. So we're really just, people are still coming into the Zoom from the waiting room. So a few things so Gemini San Antonio's Writing Arts Center. Check us out at www.geminiinc.org. Often people think we're a tattoo parlor. We're not. Even that's intriguing, but we're not. We've actually been San Antonio's Writing Arts Center for 31 years. Our mission is to teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And part of that is bringing great writers together with readers, and audiences that love poetry, love writing, and just want to find out more about the writing world. So that's what the big Texas Author Talk is all about. Believe it or not, this was a pandemic invention. We began this, I can't believe it, over 5 years ago, April 2020. Our partner in crime is Writing Workshops Dallas, a great writing arts center out of Dallas. I do want to thank the National Endowment for the Arts for funding this series. Humanities Texas helped fund it for years. And of course, we have our great independent bookstores, The Twig and Nowhere Books here in San Antonio. So our featured authors, drumroll, are Octavio Quintanilla, who is having a pretty fantastic literary year because he has had 2 books come out within 12 months. And then we're really excited to have Monique Quintana as our featured moderator. I'm going to introduce Octavio and Monique a little bit, and then I'll hand it over to Monique, and we'll take it from there. Please leave your comments in the chat. Tell us where you're zooming in from. This is virtual. We love to find out where people are joining us from. And you're free to post questions in the chat. There is an audience Q&A for the last 10 minutes or so. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll share those questions with Octavio. So just a brief and probably not fully complete bio for Octavio. So Octavio Quintanilla is the author of the poetry collections If I Go Missing and the Book of Wounded Sparrows, which just came out from Texas Review Press in 2024. It's a beautiful book. His book that we're celebrating tonight is Las Horas Imposibles, The Impossible Hours, out by University of Arizona Press. It's got a publication date of March 2025, so this is almost like a sneak peek, almost. But a beautiful bilingual book with lovely translations. I think Octavio worked very closely with Natalia Trevino on those. So we're very excited to celebrate that. He served as the 2018-2020 Poet Laureate of San Antonio, Texas. His visual work has been exhibited in numerous spaces, including the Mexican Cultural Institute in San Antonio, the El Paso Museum of Art, the Southwest School of Art, Presa House Gallery, the Brownsville Museum of Fine Art, and the Emma S. Barrientos Mexican American Cultural Center, Black Box Theater in Austin. Octavio is the founder and director of the Literature and Arts Festival Verso Frontera at Our Lady of the Lake University, a beautiful annual event. And he's the founder and publisher of A La Brava Press, a beautiful micro press that puts out wonderful chapbooks. He holds a PhD from the University of North Texas and is the regional editor for Texas Books and Review. He is the recipient of the Nebrija Creadores Scholarship, which allowed him a month-long residency at the Instituto Franklin at Alcalá University in Alcalá de Henares, Spain. And he teaches literature and creative writing in the MA/MFA program at Our Lady of the Lake University. We're thrilled to be celebrating him and hearing about his newest book and the writing process involved with that. There is no shortage of praise for this book, but I'm just going to give you one quote. The wonderful Norma E. Cantu, who obviously is from San Antonio, a great Chicano poet, critic, and writer, has said of Las Horas Imposibles, with alacrity and wit, the poet pokes and jokes at life and the elements that make human existence a conundrum. And then there is some wonderful just descriptions from the publisher itself about this book. And one example is presented in Spanish with English translations. This poetry collection comprises lyric and concrete poems, or frontextos, that explore intimacy and different shades of violence as a means to reconcile the speaker's sense of belonging in the world. More to come soon on that. And then we're so excited to have Monique with us tonight. She's our featured and guest moderator. She's the author of Cenote City from Clash Books in 2019 and is working on her second collection of fiction. Her work has been supported by Yaddo, the Community of Writers, Sundress Academy for the Arts, the Camille Harding Nelson Center, and Story Knife. And we're really thrilled to have you with us here tonight, Monique. So I'm going to hand the virtual stage over to you, and let's begin.
Hi, everyone. It's very good to be here today. So I'm coming in from Fresno, California, which is in Central California. So I'm right between San Francisco and LA. So first off, I want to thank Gemini Inc. for being so welcoming. I'll share that. I've met some of the staff at the AWP or Writers Conference Book Fair, and they've always radiated kindness. And I feel like that really reflects on the community that they create in San Antonio and then also their virtual communities. So thank you. So what I'll do is I'm going to share a little reflection I wrote about Octavio's work and how I feel about it. And then he'll read a little bit. Okay, several years ago, I logged into my Facebook account after not checking it for a week. And there was a stream of Octavio's frontexto visual poems in my feed. I thought about how weird they were and how strange to experience them in such a free fall of motion. From spending this time with his new books, I've been reflecting on the etymology of the word weird. To be weird means to be strange, but also to lean into fate. Strangeness and the way fate works are two concepts that converge in his art. Sometimes it feels like there are many different Octavio Quintanillas making art in alternate timelines. And sometimes it feels like his work is rooted in one visceral and present moment. This constant flux makes his work beautiful and elusive and always full of surprises. Octavio, thank you for sharing about your work today. And congratulations.
Well, thank you, Monique. Thank you, Alexandra, and everybody in Gemini Inc. I hope you all can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I just want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank Gemini Inc., which is one of the places that I love going to and participating in their events. They bring great writers. They hold classes, workshops, all kinds of beautiful stuff for community. So thank you for doing this and for highlighting my book, the Horas Imposibles, even though Monique and I talked about possibly talking about both books, the Book of Wounded Sparrows and Las Horas Imposibles, which basically came out at a few months apart. And with that said, I know we only have about an hour, so I do want to read some poems to start off the evening, and then Monique and I will have a conversation. I have no idea what it's going to be about, but it sounds like she wants to focus on the weird, so that's going to be interesting. So this is what I want to do. I want to read maybe like three short poems from Las Horas Imposibles, and maybe a couple of poems from the Book of Wounded Sparrows that, just so you can see the difference. And I think both books are very different. Well, I don't know. Maybe Monique has another take on that. We'll talk about that. But let me read a few poems. This one's called Night's Edge. I'll tell my mother to stop covering her feet with the edge of night. Ask her to promise me not to die in December like my father did. Imagine Christmas. Gardenias with snow on their tongues' tips. Caged dogs licking winter off their bones. I no longer have stars in my hands to light up the way. Please, mother, don't. La orilla de la noche. Le diré a mi madre que deje de cubrirse los pies con la orilla de la noche. Que me prometa no morir en diciembre como lo hizo mi padre. Imagínate la Navidad. Las gardenias con la nieve en la punta de sus lenguas. Los perros enjaulados lamiendo el invierno de sus huesos. Ya no tengo estrellas en mis manos para alumbrar caminos. Por eso te pido, madre, ya no te cubras los pies con la orilla de la noche. And Las Horas Imposibles is originally written in Spanish, and I translated the book, and then Natalia and I worked on the translations, and this is what it is. It also has concrete poetry, and maybe I'll show you some in a bit. Metaphor. What's the metaphor to say our exile begins? Spiders and snakes have lost their nests, pastures aflame. So much bird, wing, and flock in flight that the heavens all but disappear. Metáfora. ¿Cuál es la metáfora adecuada para decir comienza el exilio? Las arañas y las víboras han perdido sus nidos, los potreros en llamas, tanto pájaro volando que pedazos de cielo desaparecen. And this is what I mean about concrete poetry. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if you can see that. That's kind of like an X-ray of a sonnet. I'll read one more from here, and I'm kind of reading poems from here that are a little bit light, more, I don't know, I want to say maybe a bit emotional. But there's a 40-page poem in this book, and it's, and maybe I can read a bit later. There's a 40-page poem that is that was a challenge to write. I was challenging myself to write that 40-page poem, and later I'll find. I didn't look for an excerpt to read, but I'll find something. This is your dress. When I take off my shirt, I want to wear your dress, thinking that when I put it on, I will discover all your secrets, those you keep under your nails, those you camouflage with your skin. I want to walk the streets and feel how your blood reacts when strangers speak to you. They who undress you with a look, they who imagine filling your belly with saliva. Which is why I remove my shirt and wear your dress and look for you in the streets when you're not home to say I love the particular diagram you've made of my life. Tu vestido. Cuando me quito la camisa me quiero poner tu vestido, pensando que al ponérmelo descubriré todos tus secretos, esos que guardas bajo las uñas, aquellos que camuflas con tu piel. Quiero caminar por las calles y sentir cómo reacciona tu sangre cuando te hablan hombres desconocidos, esos que te desnudan con miradas y se imaginan llenándote el vientre de saliva. Por eso me quito la camisa, me pongo tu vestido y te busco por las calles cuando no estás en casa para decirte que te quiero con todo el mapa que has dibujado de mi vida. So let me read just a little excerpt that I just found from the 40-page poem, and it's called Lost Letter, Carta Perdida. And it's basically a 40-page poem written as a letter. I think it was, for me, it was the easiest way to navigate the the impulse of the poem, to keep the energy of the poem. And it's addressed to a lover, unnamed, really not physically described or anything, but you can tell the speaker and the person he addresses, they've had a history, they've had a relationship. One day, I will not be able to dream, and we will meet in a city where language one recognizes, a city where we can get rid of our names. Imagine to be able to call each other with only our eyes, to be able to call each other with a desire born every time we touch the surface of our skin, to exchange our mouths, to exchange our hands so we can learn to touch. Imagine to be inside the other forever. If you leave, your hands stay with me. If you kiss someone else, you will kiss with my mouth and not with yours. I don't want to leave my body anymore. I don't want to leave my body anymore and enter the dogs that doesn't know about illusions and has no interest in the future. It is so easy to say I want to die, but it's another thing to throw myself out the window. So, should I read one poem from Winded Sparrows?
Yeah, I think you have time for one more. Yeah.
Okay, I'll read one more. From Winded Sparrows. And Winded Sparrows is a completely different book. And, or I don't know, maybe I shouldn't read it. Maybe we should talk about Las Horas. Because they're two different books, you know. I'd rather talk about Winded Sparrows in terms of conceptually or poetically.
Wow. Okay, that leads me to my first question then. It works well actually. So right, you're coming out with two books at the same time, and that's just like that's very rare. That's like a big like feat. That's like accomplishment.
Right.
And so I imagine it feels very amazing, but what do you anticipate will be a big like challenge with both of them coming out at the same time? Like pretty much the same time. Like what do you think about that?
Oh man. Well, just right now you saw that just the fact that I wanted to read a poem from this book and I had to stop myself because it would kind of maybe make the conversation about Las Horas Imposibles a little cloudy because they're both books that have two completely different subject matters. Uh, and they come from a different places of my poetic experience. So that in itself is a challenge. You know, I'm still trying to find that conversation between the books where I can present both of them and say, look, this is what's connecting them. And I can find that. I just I haven't taken the time to articulate it the way I want to. You see what I'm saying? So um, having two books in the world right now limits me to, at this point, to focus on each one at a time, as opposed to bringing both of them into the conversation. Because you read them, they're completely, in terms of sensibility, in terms of subject matter, in terms of poetics, they're completely different.
They're so different.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I wanted too. You know, I didn't want to write the same book over and over and over again. Uh, Even though when I was writing Wounded Sparrows, which took 10 years to write, uh, in 2018, I started writing Las Horas Imposibles. So Wounded Sparrows took 10 years to write, and Las Horas Imposibles uh, started when I was writing Wounded Sparrows, and it took, what, 6 years to have it published. Uh, so for me, it was really interesting to keep both books, the subject matter, apart. And I really like what you said right now about the frontextos and this idea of that there's more than one Octavio doing this stuff. Because that's the way I felt about writing the two books, you know. Like when I was writing Las Horas Imposibles, I felt like I had to enter my poetics in a different way than the ones that I was practicing with the Book of Wounded Sparrows. Um, so there were two poets writing two different books. I feel, you know, and obviously, if you know, the closer you look at the books, you're going to start seeing similarities, maybe in terms of how I use metaphor or how to use the image, or how I you know I do poetic leaps or whatever. but yeah, they're completely different. And I think that's one of the challenges, to bring them into conversation right now. And also, obviously, from an editor's perspective, that I run a small press, I think it's kind of challenging to, uh, I don't know, like, how do you promote both books at the same time? People get sick of you, like, come on, you have another freaking book. So that's kind of, I don't know. I mean, I've been learning how to do that. Like, I don't want to, like I promise you, I don't want two books at this, so close together. Uh, but Las Horas Imposibles won the Ambrosio Prize, given by the American Academy of Poets. Is that what it is? Academy of American Poets? And I couldn't say no. So I'm like, okay, I'll have two books and I have to deal with it, and I have to suffer through it.
Um, so one thing I noticed, because I'm gonna talk a little bit about your first book, because I feel okay, like you fathered these three books, and it's like your first book you spent so much time with. It was like the only child for like you spent and then now it's like, if you think about it, like you have these other two like children, and I'm thinking about like birth order and like how things work like that. But like one thing I've noticed is that, like, connected to your childhood, um a lot of all three of the books, they always like they talk about animals a lot. And I'm just like I'm really taken with animals. Do you ever like teach animal fables in your lit classes?
Uh, I I I think I did in high school, but not
Mhm.
not not at the university. I don't think I've had the opportunity, or if we talk about fables, it's in passing. It's not a deep study or anything, I think. Uh, but no, not really. Not in the last. I don't know. I stopped teaching high school in 2003. No, 2006. So it's been a while since I've done that or talked about him.
So when I just finished Las Horas Imposibles, one thing that like really clicked for me is that the way you write animals, it's not like an animal fable, right? Because like historically in a lot of literature, animals are kind of like used as like this stand-in for us, right? They're just like, oh, it's to teach us about ourselves and like teach us some lesson.
Right.
Right. And with you, like the animals are very like they still carry a lot of mystique, right? There's like very much this sense of like we will never know what this animal goes through. And so I was hoping that you could read Black Cow, and we
Oh
could
yeah.
talk. Yeah, because I have some thoughts about that, and I have a question
Okay.
about
Cool. Black Cow
that in
is
your boyhood. Yeah.
it's one of my favorite poems in the book. Black Cow. My father's black cow ambles into my memory. I poke it close to its asshole, like when I was 7. I urge it to drink water. Drink, stupid cow. Drink what's left of my childhood. Vaca negra. La vaca negra de mi padre entra a mi memoria. Le doy piquete cerca del culo con la garrocha, como cuando tenía 7 años. Le ordeno que trague agua. Bebe, vaca estúpida. Bebe lo que queda de mi infancia. That's a
So
true story.
it is.
Kind of, yeah.
So okay, so when I read this, I was thinking about one of your frontextos, and you posted this a few years ago. It was a fox, and the fox was speaking, but you couldn't see what the fox was saying. There was no words or anything. I think you had did you have like an ellipses or something? Do you remember
Yeah, yeah, there was an ellipsis.
that?
That
Uh,
that box, that frontexto became a book cover for a poet's book, published
okay.
by Mouthfeel Press. So I guess somebody liked it enough to put it in their book.
Yeah, because I was thinking, I was like, oh, you write about animals with a lot of respect, because I feel like, yeah, again, it's like projecting our lives and our language onto the animals. I think that kind of like it feels like it devalues their experience in some way. And I feel like with Black Cow, like when I was reading that, like you really get like a sense of the speaker's like like frustration, like this understanding, like I will never understand you, and he hasn't really made peace with that. Like, and so could you talk about how you write animals, and then how animals work with your like with your memory and your dislocation, right? Because I'm imagining that that you're haunted by these animals from your boyhood, right? And then like having to come back to Texas and like really just kind of leaving these animals and the topography and the ecosystems that were
Right.
that they lived in, right? So can you talk about that and how that
Yeah, absolutely.
how
So animals, I'm so glad you're asking this question because I've never really thought about the animals in my books. And there's a bunch of animals. Specifically in the new poetry that I'm writing, there's a lot of animals, you know, foxes, pigs, all kind. Even in my first book, there's pigs, right?
yeah.
Um, let me start by saying that Vaca Negra, you know, I wrote it. Obviously, the speaker's remembering being a kid and having to take this, you know, take this this cow to water, which is something that I did. I grew up in, you know, I lived in Mexico till I was 9, and my father, you know, was a farmer, so I was always surrounded by cows and bulls and pigs and not necessarily goats. Once in a while, I'll see a goat, but uh, mostly cows and pigs and turkeys, stuff like that. So animals became, I think now that I think about it, they're symbolic in my poetry to maybe tap into memory, you know, to articulate memory, to not just say I remember, but to have a symbol that is recognizable. And yet, obviously, the poem is speaking about, you know, the speaker in the poem is a grown man, but once he thinks of that cow, he returns to being a boy again and being frustrated. I don't know if you ever driven, or I don't know what to call it, herd a cow to water, but sometimes it's really hard. And that freaking cow, I remember that cow was so stubborn. And I was like, you know, 7 years old, and I didn't have the strength to return it to where I was supposed to return it. And I had to walk maybe like, I don't know, it wasn't too far, maybe half a mile from my father's farmland to the river to get water. So going there was awesome because the cow wanted water. You know, I was thirsty, so we will get there quick. But it was back on the return when the cow wanted to find its own way, wanted to go its own way into into you know the woods or whatever, into other people's fields. And so I remember just, you know, pulling the rope to God, you know, bring back the cow, and the cow would want to keep going, and and it wasn't even that frustrated me. More like I didn't want to disappoint my father, you know, like I was supposed to be you know, a little man, right? Like I was, yeah, you know, like you're supposed to go and do this and get it right and come back and you know, be a man about it, even though I was 7. So I think I was more afraid of what my father would say to me, not do. He never put a hand on me, but what he would say to me if I didn't return to where he was without that cow. So I would stay with the cow until it was ready to come back, you know, and uh, so so I think the animals are going back to the poetry. I think the animals are my way to enter the sensation of being there, to reconstruct the memory that I don't know. In many ways, I've mythologized by writing about it. You know, everything I'm telling you right now, I don't even know if it happened. All I know is that it's in my head now. Like this is the way I reconstruct memory, and I think having that cow in the poem becomes almost like the only thing that is real to that memory. I don't know if that makes sense at all. I should
Yeah,
have thought about this. You should have sent me those questions before we had this conversation.
I mean, you know, I was an English major as an undergrad, and you know, at my school we had to pick an emphasis. Our advisors had us pick emphasis, and so my emphasis was on the Gothic. And one of the characteristics of the Gothic is that um, animals will talk. So if animals talk, that's automatically considered a Gothic text. And like doing like more research, I was like finding that a lot of regions, like globally, ban books where there are talking animals.
Interesting.
So I think it's, yeah, they do because they consider it almost like profane, or they consider it just kind of like disrespectful to the animals, right? Because obviously, you know, like a lot of animals are deities and things. And so I was like, oh, this like, and this reminded me, like a lot of your work reminded me of that, of like, oh, you have like a tremendous respect for the animals, and just also like, I really like the idea of keeping their mystique and
Yeah.
not trying to know too much about them. So you just kind of like take it to the cusp, like to the brink, but you don't like go over, which I think is
Yeah.
very
I,
immense.
I think I think you're on point. I've always loved animals. I always respected animals because the people that I grew up respected animals and loved animals. The animals were their friends, right? The oxen helped you, plant the field. Cows gave you milk. Turkeys gave you meat. Chickens gave you eggs. So you grow up respecting animals. I mean, and appreciating what they give you. So, I mean, you should have seen my father love the bulls he had, the oxen he had, and the cows he had. It was like, wow, he's like, and you see that as a boy, and you realize that as a writer later, you know, I want to, I want the animals to, I don't know, have almost like a sense of dignity. In the poem that I just read, I mean, that cow has the power, so. People writing comments. I'm not reading the comments because I got to focus on you. So
So, okay, so you've been doing a lot of events, especially like during the shutdown, you've been doing like an immense amount of online events and things too. It's like you're just like always super busy. I'm always like, how do you sleep? How do you like function? But what is something that you wish someone has asked you that's never come up, that you've like, oh man, I wish like someone would ask me about this and I haven't had a chance to talk about it.
uh, about my writing,
And your front textos then.
yeah, I think somebody asking me what is something that has never been asked of me before. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, I have no idea because I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Well, let's put it this way.
maybe how much dedication, how much time, how much work, how much focus it takes to write a book that you're proud of. We often don't talk about that as writers, how much we have to be alone in solitude when your friends are out there drinking or inviting you to go out. You know who you are. You're here in this conversation right now. Uh, but you have to stay home to do the work. And waking up and thinking about your writing and going to bed and thinking about your writing and waking up in the middle of the night when you go take a piss because you have this idea and you got to change it. And so you stay 30 more minutes up fixing a poem or revising a poem. The hard work, the sacrifices you got to make. I don't think anybody's asked me that, and some people don't understand that the only way you get things done is by really, in terms of writing or art, you have to really spend time thinking, reading, doing research. This stuff doesn't come to you, at least to me, it doesn't come to me like the muse or El Duende, Lorca's Duende, or whatever. No, I mean, yeah, once in a while you're walking around and you see the sky and it's beautiful and it makes you think of a metaphor and you feel inspired. But most of the time it's work, it's reading, other poets that you admire. It's learning from them, taking notes. I don't know if yeah, I don't know if you can see them. I have a bunch of notebooks where I'm always taking notes. I'm always constantly trying to be awake to the world around me so I can later sit down and try to write a poem, So I don't know. You want to ask something about that? I'm kidding.
I
I'm
was
kidding.
thinking like I was so I was thinking I would want to ask you about like music because you're posting a lot and you're adding music to your things and you also paint a lot of just kind of like musical artists that you admire and things, right? Like for example, you've like painted Prince, right?
Oh yeah, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I think it was like sometime during the shutdown, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So,
Jimi Hendrix, Prince, and a bunch of other.
yeah, so I wanted to like kind of like tap into this whole idea of like, like musicians, they have vaults, right? And Prince, like before he passed, right, he did this interview, he was saying, like, yeah, I have at least like I have over 2,000 songs in my vault that will never see the light of day, right? And so I was thinking it's interesting because of your output and you're creating so many pieces, like you have so much work, right?
Right.
I'm one and at some point you decided to call your frontextos and not call them drafts anymore, right? And you were just like,
Right.
I really want to like embrace the process, which you do. And I think like and I always really admire that about you because I feel like this whole idea of like like turning out this perfect like piece of art, I feel like that comes from like colonialism and that comes from like the industrial work complex and capitalism and just like I really like how you resist that, like saying like no, it's about the process, right? And not product. And
Right.
so like do you like since you've like kind of like made like you've kind of like reckoned with that, do you think for you and in your experience and with your work, is there space for a vault? Like do you imagine that you will have a vault of pieces that you will never put out like for a specific reason? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me comment on this idea of process and process as resistance to always thinking in terms of a final product, right? A perfect thing, a perfect made thing. Um, if I believe that, which I used to believe until I didn't, uh, I don't think I would be here talking to you right now. I don't think my frontextos would be exhibited in museums or galleries or being collected, collected by collectors or coming out in journals or even talking about them right now. So I think that I completely agree with you. Thinking of writing and creating as a process is a form of resistance to everything that tells us that we should only see the final thing, the final product, you know? As a matter of fact, I mean, well, not necessarily the books, the two new books, but uh, I wish I could go back to If I Go Missing and revise some of those poems again, rewrite those poems, but it's a done thing. So, yes, I agree with you about that. And I do take my whole work, whether it's music, art, or writing, as process, you know? And that's why, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes I started, this year I started uh, posting like little guitar clips where I'm singing. I don't know how to sing, well, I'm trying to, because I'm working on an album right now of music and songs and lyrics. I used to, music is it's a big thing for me. As it sounds like it is for you too. And I used to play in a band back in the '90s. covers, mostly like Cure songs and stuff like that. And so I started writing my own, and I realized that playing music is really easy for me. It's like writing, like it's easy in the sense that once you learn technique, or once you know more or less how a poem, the architecture of a poem or a painting, it becomes easier. So it's all practice. And I'm not afraid to show you a first draft. I'm not afraid to say, hey, listen to this, or hey, look at this painting that I just posted on Instagram. Uh, it might not be the best, but I know that if I keep doing that, for every 200 or 300 painting, there's going to be one that's really it's going to be a good one, maybe, hopefully, I don't know, for me. For every 100 songs that I write, hopefully one of them is going to have that it factor, that whatever. Or for every 100 poems I write, maybe one of them will be good, right? And it takes 10 years, it takes 6 years. So very few times have I trusted the immediacy of creating something, and saying, oh, this is great, this is awesome. Very few times. So process. And then going to your question about the vault, these are just four of my notebooks. So there's a bunch of poetry in there and writing and stuff. Oh, by the way, I got to show you something. This is going to go into the vault. It's the first novel I wrote. I found a copy of it.
So you will have a vault, is what you're saying.
I will have one, but I don't know yet. I might just burn it out. I don't know. I got to think about that. It takes guts to leave stuff behind that maybe you don't want anybody to look at. Maybe you don't want anybody to have. It was just for you. Maybe it was a different type of process inside of that you were working out
Let's watch
yourself.
Dr. Van Horn talk about early caregiving relationships. Click the play button when you're ready.
The story that we developed for ourselves.
I don't know. It's not my computer.
Yeah, is everyone muted other than Monique and Octavio?
I was worried that I started playing a video on another tab or something. That's happened before. So I was wondering if right, because this is your newest book's a translated work, right? And I was wondering if you heard about all the kind of like drama that happened with Garcia Marquez's last book, because I mean, it has a lot to do with like this whole like thing of the vault, but I was wondering how translation like played into it. So did you hear like about how like, when he was dying, he says, he goes to his sons and he says, I have this manuscript and it's terrible. Please do not let anyone publish this book, right? And it was very sad. And, his sons wrote this kind of like little message that they like a forward that they put in the new book. And, I read the new book and, it was it was a beautiful book, right? Not on the, of course he was right. Like his instinct was right. It wasn't on the level of like his other books. But, I was wondering if maybe some of his apprehension was also because he knew that someone would translate it after he was gone, and translation is such a collaborative process. And I was wondering, like, how would you feel? I mean, you're very comfortable talking about death, so I'm like, I feel okay asking this, but like, how would you feel about someone translating a whole book like of your work without you being around? Like how would that make you feel? Like, what do you think about that?
I think if I leave the book behind, like first of all, if I had a book I don't want anybody to publish or read, I'm not going to trust my kids to keep it away from the public. I'll burn it, throw it away or whatever. First of all, but if I leave something behind, and it's because I want people to see it, I want people to find it, and I want people to translate it, and I'll be okay with it. As a matter of fact, I hate translating my own work. I had to translate Las Horas Imposibles. I did the first translation, and then Natalia Treviño, a wonderful poet from San Antonio, retranslated, helped me out so much. I really appreciate her work. She's amazing translator and poet. And now I wish I had had the time, and I don't know, just maybe just the I don't know what word I'm looking for, but I should have reached out to her before I even translated it myself for her to do it. I don't want to translate my own stuff. I want to trust the translator, because if they're translating something to another language that I do not speak or understand, I'm going to trust them. Now, if they go behind my back and do stuff that add stuff that's not in the book or whatever, I mean, that's another thing, right? I mean, but otherwise, I prefer not to know. I would want, if somebody translates a book of mine, let's say, that I don't know about or have no input into, fine, translate it. But then I'll have somebody who speaks that language to read it back to me, either in Spanish or English, a language I can understand, so I can get a sense of what they're doing. If I don't like it, I'll say, no, that's not where this book is going, or that's not where the story is going, or that's not where the poem is going. Then we can have that conversation. But otherwise, I think translators ought to have autonomy. They ought to do their thing. I don't want to collaborate with translators. And if I translate somebody's book, I don't want them to tell me, oh, you ought to do this. No, I'm gonna do my translation. I'm gonna put what I know about it. I'm going to look at your work critically as a translator and as a poet, a practicing poet. And if you don't like, I'll translate 3 poems, which I've done before. People have asked me, can you translate my book? And I translated 1 book by a Colombian poet named Vanessa Torres. And I said, well, I'll translate. And this was pre-COVID, I think, or during COVID. And I said, yeah, I'll translate it. I like your work. But I don't know if you're going to like what I'm going to do to your work or how I'm going to translate it, because I'm not word for word. I'm not a word for word translator. I translate in a way that I don't want the poem to sound like a translation. So I do everything I can to benefit the poem and the language that I'm translated into. So what I did, I translated 3 of her poems. I sent them to her. I'm like, this is what I'm doing. What do you think? Just like, I love it. Okay, then I'll do it. And I don't know. It sounds like either you want to take it or not, but no flexibility.
There's one question I want to ask before we give it over to Gemini Inc. To open up for Q&A. So I mean, obviously we're gonna have like a rough 4 years, right? And so a lot of people are worried about a lot of different things, right? But in particular, money, right? And artists and their money. And so, like one of the things that really frustrated me about being like a young writer was that all my teachers and my mentors would say like, oh, you're never going to get like paid for this, and there are no like money, you just like do it just because you love it. And of course that's always the reason why, right? But like there are opportunities to like to earn honorariums or to travel or just like kind of like just like and also like make community while you're doing it. So how do you have those like how do you anticipate you'll have those conversations, moving into the next few years with your students and with the writers, like newer writers that you come across?
Okay, how am I going to have the conversation about
like
as a writer and supporting yourself as a writer?
Yeah, like not just like supporting yourself, but just like really taking advantage of like opportunities and seeking them out, right? Because I feel like writers and like artists are gonna have a hard time like the next few years, right? And so, I mean, they've always had a hard time, but like, how will you have those conversations, with with your students and with new writers of like, hey, there are like opportunities for you, like for you to like travel and to like and to like go off and write somewhere for a month or like whatever, you know, you can do. Like how will you have those conversations with students while still kind of like still keeping the pulse as like you do it because you love it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think the first thing I tell them is, you know, get a freaking job that's going to pay your bills, and then anything else that comes in, any opportunities, you take them. I mean, very few of us make a living out of what we love to do.
Right.
You know, I mean, I teach full time. You know, I recently been kind of like telling my friends, like writer friends, like, man, I wish I could just stay home and paint and write and play music. And that's for right now. That's just a dream. So I think most of the time I'm teaching a creative writing class right now, and I think slowly we'll have those conversations that often as a writer, um, as writers, as artists, we have to do things that maybe we don't want to. In my case, I'm kind of lucky because I love teaching. You know, I really love teaching. I love being in the classroom. It's just an extension of my artistic practice. So I'm really lucky in that. So there's really no disconnect other than you know administrative stuff and grading. Everything else that happens in the classroom, there's really no disconnect between that practice and the practice that I do creatively outside of it. And I'm one of the lucky ones, right? I have friends who work at warehouses and are painters or work, you know, elsewhere and they're writers, and I'm like, damn, dude, you know, by the time I'll get home, I'll be so tired. I don't know if I can, you know, I don't know if I can smoothly blend in what I just did at the warehouse with this creative work. So, I mean, that's the reality. You know, we're going to have challenges. We've always had them. I do not know one writer who lives off their writing. I do not know one artist, a visual artist or a musician, who lives off their creative work. You know, we all have to hustle. We all have to work the 9 to 5, the whatever. So, yeah, that conversation is like that. Get a freaking job, you know, pay your bills because that's going to bring you comfort. And then once you have that, then you can really start thinking about your creative work because you don't have to, you know, worry about where am I going to pay the light bill? Where am I going to get money? You know, have you ever tried selling a poem? It's never going to happen. Oh, well, maybe, because I think I'm going to get $50 soon for a poem that someone's going to publish. So $50, I mean, that's not even a steak dinner, you know, but I'll take it anyway.
Yeah.
I hope I answered your question,
You did. You did.
Monique.
On that note, on steak dinners is a good way to like move over to the Q&A.
So I don't
No,
know.
great. No, that's I loved this. Sorry, were you going to say something, Octavio? I didn't mean to
Oh
cut you
no, I
off.
was just no, just listening to what's next. Yeah, go ahead.
No, this is a great conversation. I loved the vault question, Monique. That was really interesting. Let alone the other, and I do really admire, I'm just gonna pipe in for a second here, the whole idea of process versus product in your writing, Octavio. It's you know, it kind of inspires me as a fellow poet and just as someone who is balancing creative life with other things, as many of us are. To just like embrace the process and you'll get where you need to go as a creative and as an author. So I'd love hearing you talk about that. Yeah. And I didn't know you were in a band in the 90s. This is interesting to find out. So we have actually a wonderful array of questions. We probably won't be able to ask all of them in the time we have allotted, but I will definitely do a few. Aurelio has a great question. He asks, what is the connecting or central concept in horas?
Horas imposibles.
Yeah.
I think it's violence. Uh, you know, emotional violence, border violence. Um, systemic violence, but also love. And I think overall the book is asking, to what extent does love save us from that? To what extent does it keep us whole from after we suffer a specific type of violence? But everything in the book, and I think the description of the book kind of explains that idea of and that's just one way to read the book, I think. I mean, there's so many other elements. I mean, so many other aspects of it um, that you can enter the book, through which you can enter the book. But I think the thread that kind of holds everything together is some aspect of violence. I think tonight I kind of read poems that also speak to other narratives in the book. But for me, the book it's an exercise in thinking about our violent society, our violent nature, our often our human, I don't know what you call it, instinct to make others suffer. It's about how power corrupts you, ego, greed.
No, that says a lot right there. It makes me think of that great poem actually, and I know you said they're quite different in the Book of Wounded Sparrows, but Letter to the Afternoon. I love that poem because it's almost like there is a violent, it's a disturbing and beautiful poem at the same time about like coming to the brink of something. And how violent will these young boys be? So all that to say, I loved how that's kind of approached in that poem. So great question, Aurelio. Thanks. Yeah.
And I think what you just said about Letter to the Afternoon, I think it's kind of amplified in this book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so let's like just try to get a few more questions, and there's some great one. Your talks inspired a lot of questions from people, Octavio. Philomena has an interesting question. She goes, does publishing help you lock away difficult emotions in a safe place, or does it help you through them?
Publishing, like the book. What was the first part? Secret Emotions?
Yeah, does publishing, so Philomena, does this mean publishing in terms of like Octavio is a publisher? Or does it mean him publishing his work? Does publishing help you lock away difficult emotions in a safe place, or does it help you through them? You can unmute for a second, Philomena, if you want to explain that.
Yeah, I kind of.
Yeah.
I think not the
Publishing your own work. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, but you can't wear them because you're a man.
Okay. Not the publishing itself. The publishing itself, it's like just like the aftermath of all the process of all the confrontations you have as a writer with yourself, with your past, with your traumas, with your obsessions. That's the writing itself, the thinking of the writing, the thinking before the writing, the revising, all that. That's where there's an element of, I don't even want to use this word, but I don't know, catharsis or purification. I think that can happen. It doesn't mean that you're healed, or it doesn't mean that you're a better human being. But maybe you are. Maybe I think there's a better understanding, a better understanding of where you come from, where you are, and where you want to go. And that's something that I'm always thinking about. For me, that's what makes me function in society and live with others and have this type of conversations. So I think about that. So the writing itself is where I think really beautiful things happen to the self.
Mhm.
The publication, the book itself, the product, I mean, it's beautiful. It's an object, but in itself, it's just a container for what you went through. And
Mhm.
some readers will see that. There's some really intelligent readers who are invested in reading your work, and they will see that, they will feel it. And other readers, so
No, thanks, Octavio. That's a really interesting response. I'm kind of skipping a few great questions. I'm sorry, everyone, because they're great, but this is an interesting one from Alma. She says, when translating Spanish into English, especially given the cultural richness behind languages, do you feel that something of the essence or emotional depth is sometimes lost? Do you find certain cultural nuances or emotional layers are harder to capture? So I know you've already talked about translation a little bit, but this is an interesting additional question on that.
yeah, I mean, obviously, a translation is never going to give you the emotional impact that the original is going to give you. Because often, when you write in your first language, there are things that a translation will never capture. Um, and in my case, when I translated the book, I translated it once, and then I really didn't look at the original poems anymore. I wanted the poems in English to work uh, as if they had been written in English. I suppose I didn't want them to sound like translations. What does that mean? That some of the things that the Spanish poems have are not going to be found in the English translation. Like I said before, I'm not really big on equivalency in terms of translation. I'm not really big on word for word. I want the poem to sound as if it was not translated. So there's a lot of loss. There's a lot of um, it's a lot of failure, a lot of loss. I don't know who said this, but I always love this image of translation. Something about translation is like kissing someone with a cloth between the mouth. So you might still get a little, might still get a little taste, but not the full effect.
Mhm.
That's my answer.
That's a very memorable, interesting image. I love that. I mean, we're at 8:01, so I'm just gonna ask a real quick question. That might be nice to end on. Aurelio says, is there a digital form of your wonderful paintings that incorporate words, an online presentation?
I mean, you can find examples of my frontextos with text in it. Online, just Google frontextos. A lot of online journals have published them. So please do that. Check them out. Also, go to. I invite all of you to, if you're not a friend of mine on Instagram, to go there. I post a frontexto every night, and obviously that's another conversation of how I do that. So Instagram, find me, and uh, you'll see all kinds of stuff, examples of frontextos.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, your Instagram is we just posted that. It's earlier in the chat, everyone. Mandy posted all of Octavio's handles. What is it, Octavio? At writer Octavio Quintanilla?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm laughing a lot. Sorry, y'all.
I'm just very slowly
Just happy-
typing this in here.
I'm happy because we're
Okay.
talking about poetry. That's it.
Okay, everyone, I think I mean there's great questions here. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. Please think about we have a great it does help us to hear from you. So please feel free to fill out our survey. It's very brief. It helps us continue bringing programming like tonight's with Octavio and Monique. But mostly it was great hearing this conversation. Monique, you did a great job, just interesting all the different facets of Octavio's world. We have our next Big Texas Author Talk in March. We're gonna have the amazing Melissa Studdard with us, a wonderful poet. But great to have you, Octavio. Congratulations on your new book. I loved The Wounded Sparrows. Can't wait to read the next one. And everyone, thanks for joining us for this author talk. We love our online community of writers. And check out geminink.org if you want to look at more programs. And just keep writing and reading, everyone. But thanks, Monique. Thanks, Octavio. This was great.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here.